In the dead of night, unmarked planes slipped quietly from private airfields scattered across the southern U.S., their movements barely noticed by anyone except a handful of watchful eyes. On board, over 250 Venezuelan migrants sat in silence, uncertain and afraid, their fate sealed by forces far beyond their control. But their destination was not the safety of home, nor the promise of a new beginning. Instead, they were flown to Secot, a notorious Salvadoran prison, infamous for its harsh conditions and its population of hardened gang members. This was no ordinary deportation, it was a calculated clandestine operation, orchestrated at the highest levels and hidden from public view. Families were left in the dark, losing contact with loved ones overnight. Panic and confusion spread as calls went unanswered and messages were left unread. Attorneys arrived to find their clients missing, their offices filled with unanswered questions. The government, when pressed, offered only silence and denial. Human rights groups soon uncovered evidence of a shadowy deal with El Salvador, a secret arrangement designed to remove so-called undesirables from U.S. oversight, sidestepping legal protections. Many of these migrants had followed every rule, seeking asylum through official channels, placing their trust in the American legal system and its promise of fairness. The revelation of these secret flights shattered that trust, exposing a dangerous precedent, one where executive power could operate unchecked, far from the scrutiny of courts or the public. The news sent shockwaves through legal circles, igniting fierce debate and raising urgent questions about the true limits of presidential authority in matters of immigration and human rights. For the first time, asylum seekers were being sent to a brutal foreign prison, an act both unprecedented and, many argued, potentially unconstitutional. What began as a hidden maneuver in the shadows of immigration policy now threatened to erupt into a full-blown constitutional crisis, with consequences that could reshape the nation's legal landscape. In the end, the rule of law itself was suddenly on trial, its future hanging in the balance. The crisis soon landed in the high-profile courtroom of D.C. federal judge James Boasberg, a jurist with a reputation for fairness and a sharp sense of justice. His chambers, often the site of pivotal legal battles, now became the epicenter of a national controversy. Judge Boasberg was known for his no-nonsense approach, respected by colleagues and feared by those who tried to bend the law. He wasted no time in demanding answers from the administration. After meticulously reviewing the evidence and listening to hours of testimony, Judge Boasberg ruled that the administration had illegally disappeared the migrants, violating their constitutional rights and the nation's most basic legal principles. In a sweeping order, he commanded the government to return all 250 migrants to the United States for proper hearings, or if that proved impossible, to send American judges to El Salvador to conduct emergency tribunals on foreign soil. The deadline for compliance was set, January 5th, just weeks away. Failure to comply, Judge Boasberg warned, would trigger criminal contempt charges for any official involved, from frontline agents all the way up to cabinet members. The stakes had never been higher. The ruling cornered the White House, forcing a stark choice: comply and admit wrongdoing, or defy the court and risk prosecution at the highest levels of government. The standoff quickly became a public showdown, drawing crowds of protesters and a media frenzy. The judiciary and the executive branch now faced off, with hundreds of lives and the very integrity of the legal system hanging in the balance. Judge Boasberg reminded the administration that this was not the first warning. Previous court cautions had been ignored, and the pattern of defiance could no longer be tolerated. The government's continued defiance only strengthened the judge's resolve, making clear that the rule of law would not be so easily dismissed. With the nation watching, the stage was set for a historic confrontation over power, accountability, and the future of American democracy. The secret deportations began in the shadow of a dramatic U.S. military raid in Venezuela, a move that sent shockwaves through both nations and the international community. In a stunning operation, American forces captured President Maduro, toppling the head of state in a matter of hours and leaving the world reeling. The administration quickly framed the raid as a decisive strike against tyranny, insisting it was necessary to restore democracy and protect global stability. Yet, global powers and human rights organizations condemned the action, calling it a blatant violation of international law and a dangerous precedent for foreign intervention. Amid the chaos and confusion, federal agents in the U.S. began rounding up Venezuelan migrants, many of whom had fled persecution and were awaiting asylum hearings. Targeted solely for their nationality, these individuals were swept up in a broad dragnet, regardless of their legal status, personal history, or ties to the community. The administration justified the crackdown as a matter of national security, but offered no concrete evidence to support the sweeping arrests and deportations. Families were torn apart overnight, children separated from parents, and fear spread rapidly through the Venezuelan American community, leaving many afraid to leave their homes. The legal justification for these actions was thin at best, relying on broad executive powers invoked during times of foreign conflict, and bypassing traditional checks and balances. The deportation soon became part of a larger geopolitical strategy, with officials linking innocent migrants to the now captured regime, fueling suspicion and mistrust. Critics saw it as a calculated move to strip rights from a vulnerable population, using fear and uncertainty as tools of control. The administration's actions blurred the line between foreign policy and domestic justice, raising urgent questions about the limits of executive authority. The result, a community caught between two governments, their future uncertain, and the very principles of the Constitution under threat as fear and suspicion took hold. Judge Boasberg's ruling came just after a D.C. Circuit Court stripped away absolute presidential immunity. For the first time, a sitting president could be held criminally liable for actions outside official duties. The judge's threat of contempt charges now loomed over President Trump himself. If he ordered defiance, he could face personal prosecution, a scenario without precedent. Every Oval Office decision about the migrants now carried grave legal risk. The president's attorneys warned of the consequences. Ignoring the court could mean criminal charges. The presidency, once a legal fortress, was suddenly vulnerable. Trump was caught between projecting strength and risking his own freedom. The balance of power had shifted. The president was now personally accountable. The stakes had never been higher, for the office and for the man who held it. Judge Boasberg's written ruling was blistering. He accused the administration of spiriting people away to a notorious foreign prison, language evoking black site operations, not lawful deportation. The judge condemned the government's blatant disregard for judicial authority, noting previous warnings had been ignored. The administration's pattern of defiance painted it as above the law. The Salvadoran prison, Sicotte, was described as inhumane, overcrowded, violent, and unfit for anyone, let alone asylum seekers. Boasberg forced the government to confront the consequences, return the migrants, or send officials into the very prison they'd chosen. His ruling was more than legal. It was a moral statement, affirming the migrants' humanity. The judge rejected attempts to dehumanize them as threats. The decision became a public record of executive overreach, ensuring history would remember. In America, the judge declared, "People cannot simply be made to disappear." Within minutes of the ruling, President Trump erupted on Truth Social. He attacked Judge Boasberg as a deep state activist, dismissing the order as sabotage. Trump framed the ruling as a threat to national security, insisting only he could protect America. He painted the migrants as dangerous, not as asylum seekers with rights. The tirade was designed to rally his base, casting the legal battle as a fight against a rogue judiciary. By bypassing traditional media, Trump spoke directly to his followers, defining the debate on his terms. The president's public defiance escalated the conflict from legal dispute to political war. It was clear he had no intention of quietly complying. The crisis drew global condemnation. Russia and China accused the U.S. of imperialism after the Venezuela raid, isolating America at the UN. Revelations of secret deportations to El Salvador fueled outrage. Human rights groups called it a grave breach of refugee conventions, especially the use of a notorious prison. Allies questioned America's commitment to human rights. The president's erratic foreign policy, threatening Colombia, reviving talk of buying Greenland, deepened the diplomatic rift. U.S. adversaries seized on the scandal, highlighting American hypocrisy. The fallout eroded America's moral authority and global leadership. The nation's reputation as a defender of justice was in tatters. The world watched, alarmed, as the crisis unfolded. The legal and diplomatic firestorm erupted as the president faced a historic Senate impeachment trial. The secret deportations became a real-time example of alleged abuse of power. Key witnesses testified as news of the court order broke, giving impeachment managers new ammunition. The president's willingness to defy a federal judge became the ultimate test of the rule of law. Senators faced a stark choice: uphold the Constitution or defend the president. The crisis transformed impeachment from a debate about the past to a referendum on current leadership. The fate of 250 migrants, the authority of the courts, and the presidency itself hung in the balance. The nation watched its leaders, wondering if justice would prevail. Would the principle that no one is above the law endure, or prove to be an empty promise?